Hi, welcome to Beyond Politics. I'm Catherine Clark. Ontario Liberal MP Bryon Wilfert was a dedicated teacher and an active municipal councillor before deciding to run for federal office. He's passionate about politics, he loves his career, but he also takes a particular delight in the golden age of cinema. He joins me now to talk all about that and his life beyond politics. Bryon Wilfert, welcome to Beyond Politics. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Great to be here.
Now, you seem to have been born and raised and worked all in one area. Is that fair to say, around the Toronto, Richmond Hill area?
You could say I don't get out very much. But yes, that's pretty true. That's
okay.
Pretty true.
And tell me about growing up. What kind of a childhood did you have?
I grew up in East York. I'm an only child. My parents moved to Scarborough, where I spent 20 years in what we call Scarborough. Pretty normal. I just had lots of friends and went to university at the University of Toronto, and I didn't want to leave, so I did 3 degrees there, and then finally decided I needed to earn some money and went into teaching.
What are your degrees in?
My degrees, a Bachelor of Arts, History and Political Science. My Master of Arts is in Political Science. Specialization was in Chinese politics, and a Bachelor of Education, and then later on I went to do my municipal administration program called the AMCT.
Wow. Okay. Why this interest? You mentioned an interest in China, and you now have a major interest in issues related to Asia Pacific.
Yes.
How, I suppose, did that develop?
Well, when I was 10 years old, I watched a film called 55 Days at Peking in 1963 with Gardner and Charlton, Heston. It was on the Boxer Rebellion in 1900 in China. Really interested in that film. And then 2 years later, I watched a film called Genghis Khan with Omar Sharif and James Mason in 1965. And I really got hooked on everything Asian. And I was then researched a lot on culture and food. And I've had the great privilege over the years to be able to go to Asia many times, because of my particular interest, but also because I think it is an extremely important part of the world for Canada.
Do you have a particular area of Asia that you enjoy the most?
Well, I have been the chair of Canada-Japan for 8 of the last 9 years, and so I've been to Japan on many occasions, from the very tip of Hokkaido Island all the way down to Fukuoka. But my area of academic specialization was China. But I love Vietnam as well. I like Southeast Asia. You go to Angkor Wat, Phnom Penh in Cambodia. Just the people are they're so friendly. They're very industrious, but they give the shirt off their back. I mean, they really are interested in the outside world. And I think for Canadians, we tend to focus only on one particular area of Asia, and often there are other jewels out there that we should be also paying attention to.
That's interesting that the interest developed so young. I mean,
Yes.
10 years old and watching a movie.
Heaven knows if I watched some other program, what it would have meant. But that was the Boxer Rebellion, and I really found it fascinating.
Well, movies have evidently played an
Yes.
important role in your life. You love movies, but only
Yes.
movies of a certain kind, I understand.
I love the old black and whites from the early 30s, particularly anything I can see. They just had the Jazz Singer on, which was 1927 with Al Jolson, which had elements of one of the first talking pictures. And anything that's right up to, I mean, You Can't Take It With You. It was done in 1938. It was a great screwball comedy with James Stewart and Jean Arthur and Lionel Barrymore and Spring Byington. And in those days, they had the supporting actors and actresses were really what we would call today top stars. And so it was in those days, they also left things to the imagination. So you could actually watch these programs, but they just had a real heart to it. And a lot of the Capra movies, the Frank Capra movies in particular, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, etc. But then there are real jewels that people don't know about. Manhattan Melodrama was done in 1934 with William Powell and Clark Gable and Myrna Loy, and then they got into the Thin Man series, so very interesting. But looking at the clothes of the time, the cars of the time, prices, all of those things really, as one who had taught history for many years, really to look at that period, the language used, etc. I just think there's something fascinating about that period, and so I really enjoy them.
Who first exposed you to those movies?
This is very corny, but probably before your time, but Elway Yost. Elway Yost was on TV Ontario, and he used to host these movie nights on Saturday, and he'd have two films, and often they were old 1930s, early 40 movies. And so I really attribute to Elway Yost because I started to watch them and really then got into buying the books, reading about the actors and actresses of the day.
And can I ask you how old you were when you first developed this interest?
I guess I was probably 11, 12, 13 at the time.
Oh, you were young.
I was young
because those are serious types of movies for a little kid.
They were,
a young man.
But then, you could have Spanky and Our Gang. You could have the Bowery Boys. I mean, all of those movies of the 30s as well. There was just something about them that I was attracted to. And
you really are an expert.
Well, those are areas I really enjoy.
I can barely remember my favorite movie, and you have names popping out of your head here.
Honestly, I'm on an airplane. I take a trip. People say, well, what movie did you watch? And I honestly can't really remember. But you ask me about the 30s, I can tell you. But a lot of these on the aircraft today, I just don't.
You don't bother.
They just don't register.
So it's not about going to the movies or anything of that nature. It's this specific time.
It's a specific time.
Yeah. So you have all these degrees, and you decide you're going to need to work. Why teaching?
Well, I think for me, it was either that or be a lawyer. And I guess I guess down the road wanted to make the law rather than practice the law. But teaching, to me, my great love, great passion, is to impart my love of history, my love of politics to students. And I'm always at home in a classroom. I still am today when I go to universities to speak, or colleges, or high schools, or whatever. And just for me, there's something about being able to see the light go on with a student who really then gets the same passion about an issue that you have. And also because things like Canadian history are often been portrayed as rather dull, and they're not. I mean, there are so many interesting historical figures in Canadian history, as an example, that we don't think of. And yet, when we look at Canadian history, it's how it's taught. And for me, I wanted to impart that knowledge and that interest to my students.
Did you tell your parents that it was between teaching and law? Did they have an opinion?
They had an opinion as well, and their opinion was, you do what you really feel most comfortable in, and what did you really want to do in terms of the future. And I had really thought that teaching would be something that would be good grounds for anything. As it turned out, it was.
Did you know that you wanted to go into politics? Because you studied it. And
yes.
You studied an element of politics. So.
Well, my grandfather was very active liberal. He was good friends with Roland Michener. We had a very political family, I guess, in that sense. I loved everything about politics. I went through the great flag debate of 1964, and really got to say, gee, that's really of interest to me. And then, of course, I taught all that. But then when you buy a new home, and I got married and bought a new home, they never finish the home the way you want, right? There's always problems. And in our area, we formed a homeowners association. I became the president. And a couple of years later, I became a member of council in Richmond Hill. And for me, then I was actually practicing what I taught, which really was quite exciting.
So were you actually serving as a counselor and still holding on to a day job? Yes.
I was a bit schizophrenic, I think. I had 20 years teaching and 12 years as a municipal counselor.
That's at the same time?
At the same time.
That's
and it was a real balance. I don't think you could do it today. But I did become president of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association at the same time. But fortunately, my employer was, no pun intended, was fairly liberal. And the fact that they did recognize the benefits. And they had a problem outside the school in terms of turning, lane issues and that. And I was able to get, at that time, the city of Toronto to put traffic lights out. Because I knew the process of how you make the warrants, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So try to give something back, obviously, to the school. But at the same time, my students were very interested in the fact that I could bring in practical examples into the classroom, as well as being able to teach the theory.
Absolutely. Did you ever feel overwhelmed?
No, because they always say if you want something done, give it to a busy person.
Yes.
And I hate to be idle. And maybe as an only child, you want to always be out there meeting people, seeing people. And I found it was just great. I never had, and I never have been really burnt out in any capacity. It just, I thrive on the challenges, and it's been very good.
You taught at Havergal, which
Yes.
is a school that was a sister school to the one I went to here in Ottawa.
Yes.
So I had been to Havergal, but it is an all-girl environment. Yes. What was it like to be a history teacher, a male history teacher in an all-girl environment? Because, and I preface this by saying that in my experience, there are more there now at Elmwood where I went, but there were maybe 3 men when I was at school, and they stood out because they were men.
Yes.
What was it like for you?
Absolutely the same at Havergal. There's more there now, I believe, but I was only maybe 2 or 3 of us at the time. Became very good friends with the physics teacher, Bruce Heyman, and I can say that because of people like Bruce, I kept some civility, some sanity, because you're every day. There's all these women there, both in the teaching staff and obviously the girls.
Yes.
And you do definitely need to have some male contact, which was Bruce. And then they had a couple of others that came on later. But it was a great environment. I mean, really, I've always preached that young women should get involved in the political process, and so in teaching politics in particular, I really practiced that. They also wanted to come out and volunteer on some campaigns because they want to be part of that. They want to be part of the process. And the staff were very supportive, but the parents were tremendous. Parents really, often when they come in for those parent-teacher interviews, they'd rather talk politics than talk about their daughter. And so we'd get into some interesting conversations. But at the end of the day, it was all about being able to get them excited about an issue that they then could see some practical examples of. And we would, go and really examine not only the issues of the day, but look at what are the root causes. And of course, we make it as non-political because as a municipal councillor, I wanted them to understand the impact in their own neighborhoods on issues. And they would come in and they'd say, well, we have this problem. And how do we go about dealing with it? And we take some of those as case studies and deal with them.
Did you find that your students were engaged? And if they weren't, what did you do to try to get them engaged? Because it must have been frustrating to have this very, very profound interest in what you were teaching and then not necessarily have that reflected sometimes. How did you get around that?
Well, in the senior grades, they pretty well all were there because they wanted to be there. But as we all know, we're not all artists. We're not all athletes, and we're not all necessarily geared to political science. We often have students that would come in and say, I have to go to this university. This is the university, the only university. And some of them wouldn't get in except on a guided tour. I mean, there'd be no way they could go in. So you'd have to say, you try to look at some element that would interest them. Obviously, it's a long course, whatever they were doing, and you try and sit down with them and say, okay, well, what is this that you would like? How would you like to approach it? And those were the days when computers were starting to come in and we start to go online, later in the sort of the tail end of my teaching career. But we would try and do, I mean, I used to do the Chinese Civil War out in the what I call the back 40, in which there's a ravine there. We would reenact the Battle of Vimy Ridge. We'd have, trenches. We'd go up the hill.
Oh, wow.
Because the only way you can really understand history is actually to participate in it. So we reenact the Civil War in China. We do the Vimy Ridge. We would do anything, rebellions, anything that I thought would engage them. So sometimes, in answer to your question, those type of students who may be more in the drama side would become much more engaged because then for them it was much more real.
Tell me about your wife.
By the way, though, a lot of the we did also a terrorist. We had this summit. I mean, I did a UN summit.
Yes.
But I also did a terrorist summit.
Terrorist summit?
Well, we had all these terrorist organizations, lined up, and we talked about different issues. I think probably kidnapping the principal wasn't necessarily the. But she had a good sense of humor.
Okay.
But we wanted to make it as real as possible. We only did that once, but it was fun.
Do you think that given how much the climate has changed now, globally, the political climate, that you could have done things like that, that you could do things like that now? Or would there just be outcry from parents?
Well, in age of political correctness, unfortunately, probably not. But again, I always wanted to push the envelope, always wanted to do something different because, again, if you try something new, sometimes it worked, sometimes it may not have been as successful as you like. But they had to really research the organization that they were representing or the country they were representing. They had to really be able to defend their position on different issues. And for me, that meant that they had to analyze well. They had to use their, put their thinking caps on and simply not just regurgitate information. And being challenged is what I think we want out of our young people, and that's certainly something that I continue to push.
Your wife, how did you meet her?
She was teaching at Havergal as well.
Great.
Yes.
Okay.
And, I said I'd never marry a redhead. I never date a redhead. She's a redhead, but I married a redhead. But
why did you say you would never date a redhead?
I have no idea. Those days I just said I never. I have no idea.
Did you say it to her?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. I know that didn't get very far.
No.
But although I didn't tell her right at the beginning.
Were you telling her that because you felt she had a temper, or what?
No, I'm not sure why. I just always thought maybe, I don't know, blondes, brunettes.
Yes.
I don't know. But we met, and actually I was engaged before, and she was engaged before, but when I was disengaged, nobody would know. I mean, you don't have a ring or anything. Whereas when she became unengaged, I guess, then you could tell. And so I invited her to actually see Dr. Zhivago one evening, dinner, and then Dr. Zhivago. And apparently she was deathly ill with a very bad migraine, but figured if she didn't go,
that you would.
I'd never call her again. I don't take rejection well. So
is that right, honestly?
No, I mean, politics is very personal, so naturally you in one way. So she got out of a sick bed, and we went to see Dr. Zhivago. Only later did I find out that she'd
been that ill.
That ill.
Okay, we have to follow up on this not taking rejection well. Do you really feel that? Do you really feel that you don't?
Well, to a degree. I mean, people say to me, sometimes in politics, don't take it personally. Now, you know that, of course, I mean, politics as a political animal and as a public person, of course you take things personally. And of course you want to strive to get people to support you. Although one of my former riding presidents is a very good friend, Michael Jolliffe, said to me, just stand in Hillcrest Mall in Richmond Hill and know that 6 out of every 10 people who walked by you voted for you, which isn't bad.
No.
But on the other hand, you do take it personally because a lot of things are not in your control. But I still do the same thing I did 25 years ago when I was elected municipally, and that I still do as a member of Parliament, which is phone your constituents and send them a letter based on what you told them, because too many politicians tell you one thing and do another. So if you put it in writing, and sometimes, the best calls or the best letters are the ones that are the angriest. Fortunately, I don't get a lot. But and in the age of email now, people just write it and then send it off. But I'll have people, I phone up, the man may be 50, and I said, does your mother know you write like this? He said, well, I didn't know you were going to read it. And I said, why'd you write it? I mean, if you're going to send something, see, in the old days, of course, you'd have to write it out, or even if you typed it out, you'd have to check the spelling. But now we just get emails that come in. But I think people deserve an answer, regardless.
How do they react when they pick up the phone and they hear it's you?
Often, more than often, it's shock.
I bet.
That you're phoning. And they'll say, well, you just win points just for phoning. But I think it is important. I mean, they're never necessarily going to talk to the leaders of the political parties. And so you have, in order to earn someone's trust, what I did 25 years ago, I still do. By picking up that phone, by sending them a personal letter. I really like real letters. So, although I have a BlackBerry, it's really my staff that really do the emailing to me. I like to write a real letter. And I often, obviously dictate my own letters. I sign my own letters because I think people should know that. And we do a lot of communication, both in terms of newsletters in the writing. I mean, I'm on Twitter, I have Facebook, I have YouTube, etc. And that's changed because it's evolving. Because of young people today, they talk about young people, how do you engage them? Well, then you have to look at new mediums as well. But there's nothing like an old-fashioned phone call to say to someone, you wrote me, or you called me, you have an issue, let's talk about it.
Do you not worry about the reaction you might get, that they might be angry to you personally and call you mean names?
That hasn't happened a lot, but it can happen. And I think what you have to do, sometimes in politics, it's better to have a thick skin than a thick head. Although sometimes too many people have their way around, I guess. But for me, it's about, well, you tried. And some people you can deal with, and some people... But I've often had people say, well, in the next election, I didn't vote for you last time, but the next election I really like. And it's sometimes you just have to remember that they have issues. Some of them may not be that large an issue. Some of them may not even be your issue. It could be municipal issue. Often I get municipal because people remember my days in municipal politics. The worst thing you can say is, it's not my problem. You find out, how can I direct them? You send them a letter, and you say, this is who you contact, and this is what you need to do. And then people feel a sense that, yes, there is a connection. Because everyone deserves to be heard. And even if people are not... maybe their only encounter with you. So I think it is important that you say to them, well, here's what I think. And we may or may not agree at the end, but at least you're going to get an answer. And we can't always tell you what you want to hear, but you will get an answer. Because I think the frustration often is when people ignore a constituent and feels that, well, there's nowhere to turn. Although sometimes I deal with issues that they contact you about that I absolutely have no say over, whether it's your mortgage or whatever it happens to be, but you try and at least listen to them, because listening is often more important in politics than talking.
What's the difference between municipal politics and federal politics?
The first and obvious one for me is that you actually see those changes in your community. I mean, in municipal, I can see immediately a tree stand that it's saved.
Yeah.
I can see stop signs that are put up. Right. I can see recreational centers that I were involved in. The federal order of government, it's obviously much more macro, but there are things where you got funds that contributed to, say, the Richmond Hill Center for the Performing Arts, which is about 680 seats. It's state-of-the-art, and really working on that. And that was a project that I had worked on in municipal politics, and we never got it to the point to fruition until a few years ago. But I think that there are policy issues that I'm much more engaged in, obviously, at the federal, particularly internationally. I'm vice chair of both the Defense Committee and the Afghan Committee, and for me, that's very exciting, and you see policy development issues. But municipally clearly is the bricks and mortar, often in the neighborhood. But you get, part of the job is to make the relevancy of the national government to people in communities. It's a lot easier for a municipal politician, even a provincial politician to a degree. But the federal politician really has to be able to talk about and demonstrate that there is value there. And certainly, I think the Olympics, one thing that I saw in the Olympics is it finally brought Canadians, I think, really together, and we've dropped this notion of a hyphenated Canadian, which I cannot stand. I mean, you may be of Italian origin, but you're Canadian, because if I say you're Italian-Canadian, the emphasis is on the first, not the latter. And we really needed to come together, and I think that it was a real credit both to our athletes, to everybody involved, and the security and all of that, and all the thousands and thousands of volunteers. It was amazing, the stories of people who would leave their communities and go out there and do the really good things that made the Olympics what it was.
Do you drive back and forth to Ottawa? Do you fly? How do you get here every week?
I fly every week, but I'm always back in my riding on the weekends. Extremely important, because people want to see you.
Right.
They invite
so does
you to
your
all
wife,
sorts of
I'm assuming.
Absolutely. So you want to be in the riding, you want to be there.
Yeah.
The flying, though, also gives you the advantage that sometimes you get held up here, so you can leave later.
Right.
I drove once, and that cured me.
Did it?
Yes.
What, you hit traffic?
Going on the 401 at 125 kilometers an hour, and people going at 140, 150, and you felt I was parked. And I didn't like that. And I do like the flexibility. Sometimes you just get held up here, or you may stay in the riding and then come back, depending on the situation. My Fridays are certainly reserved as much as I can for constituency work in the office. But when I was the parliamentary secretary to both two ministers of finance and the minister of the environment, I was obviously here on a lot of Fridays as well. Yeah. But I've been very privileged. I worked both with Paul Martin and John Manley, Had the great privilege of working with Stefan Dion. Named to the Privy Council in 2004, and for me that gave me a real eye-opener as to documents that I could see. I couldn't see classified top-secret documents before 2004 when I was Parliamentary Secretary, but after, when I was Parliamentary Secretary to Environment, I had that security clearance. And that made a big difference in terms of also being able to understand the workings of the department and really the issues that you needed. So I'm sympathetic to those who don't have that, who are currently in parliamentary secretaries in the current government and are not privy councillors.
Are you enjoying this work? If you had to choose between municipal and federal now, are you enjoying this enough that you are happy to keep doing it?
I would say that in my 12 years of municipal politics, the first thing you always remember is you only rent the chair. You don't own it. I thought I'd accomplished everything I could in my 4 terms as a councillor. I became head of the FCM. It was wonderful. But at some point, you have to decide, and the riding opened up. There was new boundaries. And as long as I have the fire, I'll continue to do it. And I'd rather, at some point, you go when they're doing this, not when they're doing that.
Yeah.
So you really do have to think about that. But every election, I always do an assessment. I always talk to my supporters. I look at what have I accomplished, and what more can I do? And as long as I feel I can contribute, then I will continue to serve the best interests of Richmond Hill. And I've had a tremendous run. It's my 25th year in elected office, and every day I come to Parliament Hill, every day, and I know you would know this very well. I walk in those doors, and it sounds corny, but it's such a privilege. I mean, just looking at the architecture, just think I work here, which for me it's a real trust to be able to go into that building. And unfortunately, sometimes politicians have been given, I think, a bad rap. I think we're just like everybody else. We have families. We try and do things that we think will be better. But at the end of the day, if you can leave the place better than you found it, that's all you can ask for.
Well, it's been a real pleasure to chat with you today, and I thank you for taking the time to be here. You're obviously very committed to your work.
I love my work. In fact, some people say maybe I love it too much, but I really do love it, and it's for me something that I'm actually doing the dream, which, as they say, from watching a movie in 1963 on the Boxer Rebellion, to teaching politics, to now actually doing it. What more could you ask for?
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.